Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to Star Trek Prodigy, a ReBingeIt podcast. My name is James.
And my name is Kim. And we're watching and overanalyzing Star Trek Prodigy, one episode at a time, like true Star Trek geeks. Hit it. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 1, Episode 14, Crossroads. This episode began streaming on Paramount Plus November 17th, 2022.
And I was disappointed that this episode did not feature the long-running British soap opera called Crossroads.
I was just happy it wasn't another bad Deep Space Nine mirror episode.
There are no bad mirror episodes. You and I don't see eye to eye on that one.
Yeah, I do not agree.
Oh, although I would love to see the mirror version of this crew.
It would be kind of funny, actually.
Yeah.
I do admit it.
The diviner would be a caring and loving father who was a galactic philanthropist.
You know, I have some thoughts that maybe that's what's going to happen to him, that his version of going mad is that he turns into a nice guy.
Okay, that's pretty funny.
Yeah, that would be good.
Well, the description of this episode is, when the crew attempts to secure transport to the Federation, they unwittingly cross paths with the Vice Admiral who is hunting them.
That's a pretty good summary.
Yeah, the end. Thanks for listening to the podcast.
All right, let's get started walking through the episode. Well, we open on the Dauntless and Ensign Tahani helping the diviner who is struggling to walk.
Still not her name.
I did see online that someone asked the head writer if this was a joined or unjoined trill, and he said unjoined, so you've got your question answered.
Oh, I have.
Well, the diviner has still lost his memory, and he can't remember his daughter's name. Janeway turns up, and she asks if there's been any progress. The diviner kind of shockingly tells her that he wishes he could help with the answers that she's looking for. But then he does manage to suddenly remember, my progeny. And he says, her name is Gwendala.
That was interesting. He seemed to want to be helpful.
Yeah.
Maybe he's a victim of his environment, and he's not actually a bad person.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think it would be interesting if his version of going mad is he was suddenly a good guy. But every time we have watched an episode that has had the diviner in it where he's saying something or doing something, I am annoyed that he is as together as he is.
Yeah.
Because what is the point of this supposedly terrible weapon of making a person mad if it really just is a temporary thing and he's just fine?
Well, it's because he's from the future.
Yeah, I'm hoping that they have some kind of an excuse that with his metabolism, or maybe the fact that he was from the future, or just because he did some time travel or something that says the effects of Zero were different on him than they would have been on someone else. But I need an explanation.
His mental discipline allows him to overcome the exposure to Zero.
All right.
We now go to the planet Hoth, or another ice planet, but I'm sticking with it's Hoth. And Dal is recording a captain's log.
There are many times during this episode where we felt like this really looked like and felt like Star Wars again, like we'd reverted all the way back to episode 1.
Yeah.
And the ice planet definitely felt like Hoth.
Yeah, I was checking the background to see if there are any snow speeders in there.
Well, we have something similar.
Dal explains the plan, which is to stash the Protostar somewhere safe while the crew hitch a ride to warn the Federation and Starfleet. Inside the ship, we see Jankum is still puzzling over the weapon. Rock is worried about Murph, who's still in a cocoon, but he's still trilling, so like Murph does, so I don't think he's too bad.
Yeah.
The crew tells Holo Janeway that they'll miss her, and she advises them if they get into a pinch, find the real Janeway. They put her into sleep mode and unenthusiastically leave the Protostar. Then, using a phaser, cause an avalanche, burying the Protostar under snow and ice. Probably a good idea, but you'd think sensors could penetrate snow and ice?
Yeah, except maybe putting it into sleep mode makes it harder to detect. I did actually think this was a relatively good idea, and they seem to think that they're in a remote location. They're not expecting to run into Starfleet here. It's a legit plan, better than hiding it behind a moon.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Why would anybody scanning a random patch of ice in the middle of nowhere? Okay.
Exactly.
When it comes to ships, Jankum tells the others, Tellarite royalty cannot travel on anything less than a warp 5. I think he's leaning into that a little bit too much.
Yeah, he has taken that on.
Rock's looking at the sky and warns them of an incoming storm. Then Jankum asks her, are you a meteorologist now? The ever upbeat Rock replies, maybe I am.
Oh gosh, adorable.
Yeah, she really is.
So they walk to Denaxi Depot, which is the only major transport hub in the sector. Gwen points out that it's a haven of smugglers and anyone wishing to disappear. And Dal says, well, we'll fit right in.
Do you think It could be a hive of scum and villainy. Maybe even a wretched one.
These are not the children you're looking for. Inside the depot, Jankum is complaining that it's more like a junkyard.
Yep.
Gwen says it doesn't matter, they just need transport. A shady-looking character overhears this and introduces himself as Captain Okana at their service.
The guy's got an eye patch. He's a pirate. He's obviously a pirate.
Well, he actually is Okana from a Next Gen episode, so we've got a call back here to another Star Trek.
Yes.
But also, when I first saw him, I thought it could be Admiral Vance from Discovery, because he does look a lot like Vance.
Maybe it's Vance, undercover, having traveled back in time on a secret mission.
Yeah, he would have had to travel back in time.
We'll get the Discovery tie-in in a future episode.
It could happen.
Yeah. That seems pretty reasonable.
He does ask what goods the crew has to trade for transport. Dal thinks they can do better than this guy, and they start wandering away, but Gwen stops him and asks, how fast is your ship? And then we get a great overview shot of his very functional-looking ship, which looks very familiar as it matches the TNG style. Okana says it'll go all the way to Warp 4.
I feel with the look of the ship, this is now just channeling Star Wars. I'm expecting this ship to be called the Centennial Hawk.
Oh, very good. Jankum is a little rude back to the guy, and he's condescending, saying, oh, this guy thinks his ship is fast.
Yeah, the Tellarites aren't terribly pleasant, are they? They're a little bit upfront.
I wonder if they were setting us up for the thing that happens in this episode where he gets knocked down a peg.
Yeah.
Because he's been talking about being royalty and how, he doesn't accept anything less than whatever. And then he gets a little bit of a comeuppance later. Well, Okana says he'll transport them for a few kilograms of deuterium, and the crew agree. But just as they do, there's an alert sound, and two angry-looking aliens pull a phaser on Okana and tell him, hands up. They accuse him of smuggling illegal contraband, and they hit the side of one of the containers, and a lot of small globes fall out. And he immediately says, oh, those aren't mine. I'm holding them for a friend.
Yeah, they're totally going to believe that.
Yeah.
Well, these guys appear to be the security at the depot and actually arrest Okana. And Dal tells them they're not with him and they were just leaving.
Yep.
The emergency alert is still sounding and all the ships are grounded because of the incoming storm. Dal suggests that they split up to cover more ground, but warns them to be careful. And now we catch up with Barnis Frex, who appears to be in a bar somewhere telling stories. Janeway has finally caught up with him and beams down with a landing party. Commander Tysus, who's the Andorian, tells Janeway he's not answering his communicator. And Janeway responds with, some Starfleet officer.
I think we already had some hints of that when we knew he was just checking the boxes, when he didn't know what Gwen was, and he was just like, I'll just put none of the above.
Right, he didn't seem like one of the A squad.
Yeah, he's probably the kind of Starfleet officer who would have been sent to Deep Space Nine in the first season. Then we see Tysus walk right past Rock Talk, and Rock is asking different people for a ride. And now we discover that we're in the same depot with the Protostar crew.
Yes! I was so hoping someone would see the real Janeway. As it turns out, Rock would probably be in the best one.
Well, someone does eventually, but yeah, I think if it had been Rock, we would be in a much different position.
Rock is still asking other aliens for a ride, and one takes a look at her and then runs off seemingly scared, dropping one of the balls that Okana was smuggling earlier. Was this guy frightened of Rock, or was it when he saw the Murph cocoon?
I don't think it was the Murph cocoon because he looked up at Rock and then kind of went, and then dropped it. So I guess he was scared of the Rock alien? I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I watched it a couple of times and I'm like, I think he was just frightened of Rock, but...
Yeah. Well, Jankum is also trying to hitch a ride and runs into the obnoxious Dr. Noam. And they insult each other because they're both Tellarites.
Yeah.
And no one calls him an undersized pauper and tells him that Pog is a name that they reserve for runts.
Oh, he really is very rude. Are we actually sure here that Gnome is really Starfleet?
This was the least Starfleet behavior of anyone, and Jankum was about to tell him the whole story, but then he got distracted by the insults. So just the fact that he was so obnoxious and didn't treat another being with respect like he should, like I'm sure Starfleet teaches, kind of unraveled the whole thing here.
Right. Maybe Dr. Gnome is a Gamma Quadrant Tellarite. Because in Deep Space Nine, everybody we saw coming through from the Gamma Quadrant tended to be jerks.
That's absolutely true. Now we find Gwen, who's talking to a Klingon, again, trying to find transport. Yeah. The Klingon wants to trade her programmable matter armband, but Gwen is like, that is not for trade. And he says really menacingly, well, well, how about I just take it? But before a fight starts, Ensign Tahani steps in and the Klingon slinks away.
Okay, firstly, this Klingon has no honor.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think he's lucky she didn't beat the snot out of him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Gwen introduces herself, and immediately Ensign Tahani is like, Gwendala!
Still not a name.
And she tells Gwen that Gwen's father is on their ship, and he's been looking for her. And she says they need to know where the Protostar is.
Gwen tells us she's mistaken and has to go. She runs away, jumping onto a passing transporter and leaving the ensign behind.
Ensign Tahani.
Now we see Dal's progress, and he walks past Janeway, then hears her voice asking for a status report, and he turns and says, Captain Janeway? She replies, I prefer Vice Admiral Janeway.
This was the coolest scene.
Oh, I have to agree. Dal is completely starstruck and can't even get his words out. And even here, Janeway gives him good advice about fear killing dreams and how he should just go for it. You gotta love Janeway.
We can't deny that the main reason we started watching the show was because Janeway is there.
Well, yeah, there is that.
A hologram or real. I almost feel like the real Janeway has been a bonus.
Yes.
We didn't even know that was going to happen.
As Dal is talking to Admiral Janeway, Tysus has found Frex, who then starts spinning up a story about how his station was destroyed by 6 ruthless savages. Frex starts giving a description of the Protostar crew, and Janeway realizes one of them is Dal. She turns and says, they're here.
Oh, she has that very serious Janeway face.
Oh, yeah.
Dal runs to the others, telling them he's found Starfleet, and Zero thinks this is spectacular. And Dal is like, no, not that spectacular. Janeway's landing party finds them, and a chase starts. She tells Frex, you forgot to mention that they're just kids. Janeway calls the depot security and has them lock down the facility.
Yeah, I think she should really question just how good of a Starfleet officer this guy is.
Gwen tells the others that she's learned that her father escaped from Tars Lamora and is on the Starfleet ship. Zero says the diviner was imprisoned on Tars Lamora, so doesn't understand how this happened. But Dal tells them the problem is Starfleet thinks they blew up the relay station and kidnapped the Protostar's captain, who happens to be a close friend of the Admiral. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
And Rock now puts to voice what everybody is thinking when we're watching this episode, and she says, you all talked to Starfleet, but no one told them about the deadly weapon, the sole reason that they left the ship. She's like, come on, guys.
I love how she's totally the voice of reason at this point. It really sort of fits.
Yes, because she would have told someone. If she had found one of the Starfleet people, she would have been the one to tell them.
Right.
Yeah.
Zero says they can't let them find the ship and activate the weapon. As the depot security now start pursuing them, they requisition a land speeder and escape just as the doors are closing, but they're not out of the woods yet as 3 small speeders start following them.
Very Star Wars.
It made me think of the chase sequence in Solo.
Yeah.
As they're being chased, Rock suddenly says, guys, Murph is about to hatch. And Dal suggests, couldn't he wait?
That's not how it works.
They manage to knock out one of the pursuers, which crashes, and they find Captain Okana being held in the speeder.
I feel like we could just call him Captain Eye Patch from here to be easier. I wasn't clear here if he was being held in the speeder or if he was hiding. I think he was hiding.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he was hiding.
Yeah.
Also, he says that this species is the Xindi.
Oh, the security. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Which I think they came from some kind of Star Trek fan fiction called Enterprise.
Called Enterprise? Yeah. Uh-huh.
As they flee, there's now an avalanche, but they're still being pursued. Captain Eyepatch opens a case on the speeder, which contains a canister of chlorine trifluoride, illegal in most parts of the galaxy, and Jankum very excitedly plugs it in. The speeder then takes on a huge boost, jumping the canyon and avoiding an avalanche.
It's nice that fluoride has some more uses in the future.
Yeah, and added with chlorine. They arrive back at the Protostar, which is hidden under the ice, and Janeway greets them, asking, how long was I out? She wants to know everything that happened. How did it go? Universally, they each say, terrible, the worst.
Awful. The speeder sound when they stop is, again, something so like Star Wars. And even when they do the stop and they sort of curl around, it's very Star Wars.
The Xindi and Starfleet have now reached the abandoned speeder, but the ground starts to rumble and there's cracking and the Protostar lifts out of the ice.
And we have a great use of the Prodigy music during the sequence.
Oh yeah, the use of the music has been great to this point.
Yeah. Murph is starting to hatch and Rock is all excited. But now in orbit, the Dauntless is in pursuit. And we also see the size difference between the two ships because the Protostar is pretty small.
Right.
Captain Eyepatch, who has joined them on this whole adventure, says, well, you're in more trouble than I am. And Admiral Janeway orders, don't let them get away. As the Protostar jumps to warp, the Dauntless chases them at a high warp through a quantum slipstream. By the way, quantum slipstream, did I not bring that up a whole bunch of times early in season 1 because I was convinced that's what the Protostar was? Turned out that's what the Dauntless had.
You were so happy when that came up. That was very funny when we were watching. You were like, see?
I was. There's also a funny line here when Holo Janeway says, oh, the real version of me is following in a quantum slipstream. Good luck getting away.
I like that.
It's very funny. Well, the Dauntless is trying to hail, but the Protostar can't reply because they're afraid it will activate the living construct, so they just keep running.
Too much of a risk, yeah.
Yeah, and Pog is desperately trying to get the Proto jump online, which, of course, we know from earlier in the season that it takes forever. And he tells everyone to shut up because he's trying to work.
Don't we all know that feeling?
Oh, 100%. I've absolutely had people standing at my desk yammering at me while I was trying to fix something. And it's just like, please stop talking to me.
On the Dauntless, the Diviner is on his feet, but very shaky. On a view screen, he sees the pursuit and says, the Protostar. Would you like to say that?
The Protostar. Lies and hypocrisy.
His voice doesn't seem as menacing these days, does it?
No.
Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Protostar, Murph has hatched, and we get the first view of Murph's new form. He's turned into a Pikmin.
He did look like a Pikmin, even with the little thing right on top of his head.
I'm impressed at this. They're crossing so many genres. They're now into video games. It's so impressive.
Now we've gone to Nintendo.
Yeah. Well, the big deal is now Murph has arms and legs, and he runs to Rock for a hug.
Yeah, he still makes the same sort of cooing sounds.
Yes.
I know you were really hoping he was going to turn into Wesley Crusher.
Well, I'm not giving up on that yet because I expect Murph may have other evolutionary steps along the path. Could be more cocoons. This isn't his final form.
I would think he has more cocoons in his future, yeah.
Well, unfortunately, the new arms and legs version of Murph is just as accidentally chaotic as the previous one. He jumps onto a console and launches a torpedo at the Dauntless.
Oh, man. Just like a cat would do. I had a cat do that to me when I was actually presenting to my entire department, and a cat stepped on the space bar and didn't lift its foot, and it just advanced through like 50 slides really quickly. So I am familiar with this, but it seemed like it was too easy to launch torpedoes. Would it really just be one button? I mean, you don't have to enter a pin. Is there no security?
Yeah, maybe like an arming switch, like a physical switch you have to turn to shoot things. Don't shoot things.
Yes, it shouldn't just be something you could accidentally hit or a cat could accidentally walk on. I suppose Starfleet would discourage having cats on the bridge, but still, it does happen.
Well, we've seen in Lower Decks, there's a cat who's a senior officer.
Yeah, but also you could, when you get hit by weapons fire and you're rocking back and forth, you could accidentally hit it. Or if you're hit by some kind of debris or something, you're always flying around on the bridge. So if it's that easy to launch a torpedo, I think it's very dangerous.
Oops, I hit the auto-destruct again.
Exactly. Whoops.
The launch torpedo hits the Dauntless, but the shields hold and Janeway prepares to return fire. The proto-jump is now ready, and just as Dal orders, go fast, Janeway shoots the third nacelle, disabling the Protostar and knocking it out of the slipstream.
You know what they really need is, have you ever seen cars that just put loudspeakers right on their roof so they can just like talk into a microphone and it just blasts out of the speaker? Yep. That's what they need here.
It's going back to your idea from last week. They need to find an analog solution to a digital problem.
Exactly.
I'm thinking the towing sign might be a good one as well.
If they could flash up the message like on the back of the Protostar or something.
Yes.
It's like, oh, don't come close. It's very dangerous.
On the Protostar, Captain Eyepatch asks, how far to the neutral zone? Hologram Janeway tells them that this is a Federation ship. They can't go into the neutral zone. Jankum asks, why not? It's neutral. It's right there in the name.
The line of the episode.
You laughed so hard at that.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. It's neutral.
Holo Janeway then explains how, as a Federation ship, they can't enter the neutral zone as it could risk starting a war. Captain Eyepatch tells her, not if we modulate our shields to hide from their sensors.
Risky.
Gwyn says so they could go in, but the Admiral couldn't follow. Zero sets a course and Pog starts remodulating the shields, and they enter the neutral zone.
Back on the Dauntless, the Admiral orders to continue pursuit, but the first officer says she may be making an emotional decision because of Chakotay. And he tells her, at risk of war, he cannot follow her orders.
Thank you, writers. Thank you for actually addressing this. I've made this comment in Deep Space Nine before. This is an officer refusing an illegal order. Like the episode where Cisco launches chemical weapons at a marquee outpost, and they're just happily going along with it. You're committing a war crime.
Yeah. Well, they all sort of looked at each other, but then they still did it.
Yeah. Whereas here, we actually have an officer making that call that you're asking him to do something which is against the rules, which is illegal, which could start a war. I really kind of like that.
Yeah, I don't dispute that he's doing the right thing, but I do dispute that him accusing her of being too emotional seemed kind of out of left field.
Yeah.
If we think about her relationship with Tuvok, she's used to having somebody non-emotional in that first officer role.
Yeah.
So that probably is a comfort zone for her. But I feel like he's accusing her of something that just seems out of line.
Yeah.
I suppose what I need to get used to is on this show, things happen a lot quicker because it is a 30-minute show. It's a kid show. We don't spend a lot of time exploring stuff. You know, we sort of jump in. So I guess maybe we were just jumping to it and we were supposed to believe that that's what was going on, even though it didn't feel earned.
Janeway's taking an awfully big risk here.
Well, then an alarm sounds on the bridge and they receive a hail and 3 Romulan ships decloak. It was very cool.
Oh, and these are the full-size warbirds. These aren't the little ones.
Commander Kaseth of the Romulan Empire appears on screen and tells the Vice Admiral, "You're approaching the neutral zone, and entering the zone would be an act of war." And shockingly, it ended like that.
Wow, was that a killer of a cliffhanger?
Too much of a cliffhanger. All right, let's move on to what stood out to us in the episode.
Well, somebody finally said it about the neutral zone. It's in the name. Shouldn't it be neutral?
I mean, I feel like I have been thinking that my whole life. I don't understand. Why is it so bad to go into an area called neutral? It's neutral. I really laughed when Jankum said that.
Yeah. We're back to great musical scoring. This whole episode, really good.
I think the only time we've complained about the music was when we were missing the Borg theme in the Borg episode. But otherwise, the music has been great.
Also, visually impressive.
Yeah, an absolutely beautiful episode. When they're on that ice planet, there's lots of really cool things. And when they're in the quantum slipstream, that is really cool. Yeah, it was definitely visually impressive.
Pikmin, which was one of our favorite games back in the day.
Yes, that's true. There's lots of Admiral Janeway in this episode, and she's got like this cool cape-like jacket on with a hood. I mean, it's amazing. Again, Jedi reference, but you know, it's all good. We had the quantum slipstream, of course, because I've been waiting for that since early in the season.
You were very excited about that.
Yep. And there's this very specific reminder when Janeway looks at our crew that they're kids. Yeah. That's something that we haven't heard really since very early in the show. And so it was almost like it was telling us, here's why they didn't do the right thing in this moment, because they all sort of panicked and decided the best thing to do was to run away rather than, hey, we need to talk to you. We need to tell you what happened. Yeah. But they didn't have the faith or the confidence that they could have a reasonable conversation with Janeway. And she recognized they were kids, so she probably would have listened to them, you know, at least let them tell their story. But they didn't make a good decision. They ran off.
Yeah, they should have got Rock to talk to her.
Yeah, I think Rock would have just insisted on telling the story and wouldn't have run away.
Yeah, that would have been kind of an anticlimax.
Yeah, all the chasing would have been out.
And then Janeway figures out how to turn off the living construct, the end.
Yeah, she walks in there, she puts her hand on her chin, and she's like, have you tried the power button? Click, and it turns off.
Anything else?
I think when we get to the cliffhangers in these episodes, I find them unsatisfying because the episode itself is so short. It's 26 minutes long. And then to get a cliffhanger at the end of that, it's just like, oh man, did enough happen to earn that cliffhanger? And every time there's a big one like this, I'm like, oh, dang it.
I'm going to kind of disagree there. I thought this was a fantastic cliffhanger. The way it built up to this point, and then it just dropped right at this critical moment. I'm like, oh, this is perfect cliffhanger work. Good job.
All right.
Well, it really does fulfill its purpose of it definitely makes you want to come back for more.
Yes, that is true. It does make me want to come back for more. Although typically with a cliffhanger, I always think, oh, I should have just waited until next week and then I could have watched 2 together. I would do that quite frequently with shows that I knew would have big cliffhangers. I would actually save that episode, you know, on the VCR back in the old days. And I would wait until the new season started, and then I would watch the cliffhanger episode so that I could jump right to the next episode. I did that many times.
Okay, that leads on to, so, very important. How does it rate with your greatest cliffhanger of all time? And I know you love this. Best of Both Worlds Part 1.
Well...
Or is it completely unfair to even ask to compare them?
Well, I think it's a very tough question. I find very little stands up to that. I think because it was the only Star Trek at the time. It was the only Star Trek in decades at that time.
True.
And you're so, by that point, invested in the characters and invested in Picard. It was one of those cliffhangers where you knew it was going to be months before it was resolved.
Yeah.
And it was so emotional and amazing. I think it's hard to compare that to anything, honestly.
Yeah.
Certainly in my own experience because of where I was in life when I watched that episode. I think if you went back now and you'd never seen Star Trek, The Next Generation, and you watch it new, does it have that same emotional impact? I don't know. I can only tell you from my experience that these two things are not the same. First of all, the peril of Picard and crew doesn't compare to the peril that we see here. Because technically what has happened is our crew has gone into a safe zone and disappeared into the neutral zone, right, by changing their shields.
Yeah.
And Janeway is just being warned off of going into the neutral zone. So I don't think the emotional stakes compare.
Interesting.
But you reached high. You reached to the heights and said, how does it compare to the greatest cliffhanger of all time? So
you got to compare it to the greats.
You got to expect that kind of reaction from me.
Okay, well, let's move on to character development.
Yeah. Does Murph getting arms and legs count as character development?
I suppose it's character additions.
Well, it's character evolution.
True.
I wonder if Murph will ever be able to talk or if he'll just always be a Pikmin.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know how I feel about this evolution. Maybe because I like Murph as a cat. I think I said this in the last episode, and I'm not sure I'm prepared for them to lose their pet. I mean, I imagine that this allows this character to change and grow, like kids who are watching the show are going to change and grow as they're watching it. So I can see some of the value in that. At the same time, so many of the other characters are changing and growing. So we couldn't have one that was just a cute pet?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't think we saw any real change in any of the characters, except just reinforcing that Rock really does seem to be the very level-headed one.
Yeah, I'm not sure there was a lot of evolution in any of our main characters.
Yeah.
There was certainly that interesting scene between Dal and Janeway when Dal was almost like a bit starstruck.
Yes.
And he said that line about, have you ever wanted something so much that you were afraid you were going to goof it up in the moment? And I think that, again, is another, maybe not so much a development and change in him, but him revealing sort of more of himself and more of that imposter syndrome and that general fear that he has and certainly would have in this situation. So I think that was a meaningful scene and I really liked it, but I don't know that it really advanced him.
Yeah.
But it revealed more of him, so that's character development. Mm-hmm.
I did like how he was kind of starstruck with Janeway.
Yeah. And then when she responded in a very hollow Janeway way, he was like, nah, I should have known you'd say that. You know, it was just a really cute scene.
Yeah, I thought that was good. And the final thing for me here is I think we confirmed why you put Frex in the back end of nowhere.
Yeah, that guy's terrible.
Yeah.
They were savages.
6 of them.
Yeah, really, they were kids and then their pet.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that's all we have for character development this week. So let's move on to how this episode worked as a kid's show and hear from our kid correspondent, Mahi.
Hi, Mahi. What did you think of this episode?
The episode was thrilling with some sad parts. It was thrilling as every crew member of the Protostar, except Rocktalk and Murph, got to meet a real Starfleet officer who is a member of Vice Admiral Janeway's crew. The Protostar crew almost got away from Vice Admiral Janeway 3 times. One from the spaceship docking port, next when they stole Okana's ship, and then when they were in warp being chased by Janeway in the spaceship Dauntless. But it was sad that the crew did not tell the truth about the Protostar or the weapon on the spaceship when they met the crew of the Dauntless. The diviner is finally getting his memory back in pieces, and he even remembers his daughter's name. Every time Vice Admiral Janeway thought that the Protostar crew was bad, something accidentally happened that made the situation even worse.
Should the crew have run away or told Janeway the truth?
The Protostar crew should have told Vice Admiral Janeway the truth. I'm sure she would have believed them and helped them, but now I am sure she will catch them and ensure they are punished as she thinks that they destroyed the space station.
What did you think of new Murph?
The new Murph is really cute, but seems clumsy. If it's not for Murph triggering the torpedo launch, the Protostar and its crew would have gotten away. But I still have to admit that Murph is very cute and adorable.
Do you think Murph will change again?
No, I do not think Murph will change again. It has completed its metamorphosis just like a butterfly.
Was there a lesson?
From this episode, I learned that we should not give up. Vice Admiral Janeway did not give up her search for the Protostar and its original crew. She is finally catching up to finding the truth. It's always best to tell the truth, even though you may get into trouble for a bit sometimes. Had the crew told the truth about the weapon on the Protostar when they had met Starfleet, they could have gotten the help they needed instead of being chased. I also learned that we should not assume if someone is all bad or all good without knowing the truth.
What do you think will happen if hologram Janeway met the real Vice Admiral Janeway?
It would be a weird meeting, like talking to yourself in the mirror. Hologram Janeway can tell the Vice Admiral the truth about the new crew on the Protostar, and also tell what happened to Chakotay and his crew. She can also warn the Vice Admiral about the weapon on the Protostar and how it destroyed the space station. This can help clear the names of the Protostar kids' crew and get them to the Federation.
Thank you, Mahi.
Thank you for your feedback, Mahi.
I love that Mahi gets all these great lessons out of the episodes. I sort of feel like the lesson of this episode was being obnoxious ruins everything. Because if the obnoxious Dr. Noam hadn't been as obnoxious as he always is, Jankum would have told him the whole thing. He started to tell him. And then he was like, wait a minute, you just insulted me. Being obnoxious ruins everything. The lesson.
Okay, that's a good lesson, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our feedback section. And we got one really big piece of feedback from Andy in the Midwest. I will read it. Greetings, enjoying your Prodigy podcast. I enjoy your thoughts as well as Mahi's feedback. This episode left me in a state of high anticipation for the next episode.
Oh, yeah.
I almost wish I had just waited until next week to watch it so that I could get the instant gratification of seeing episode 15.
That sounds familiar.
Although, who knows, maybe it will leave me with the same anticipation of episode 16. Yeah, exactly. It was a little frustrating to have the crew so close to sharing their story with Janeway, but I understand the narrative reasons for drawing it out, and I think they mostly did a good job of giving the Prodigy crew reasons not to share their story during the respective encounters. It's too bad Rocktalk didn't encounter Janeway. I think she would have immediately shared the whole story, and we would have had a faster resolution.
Exactly.
I really like Murph, so I'm reserving judgment on its new form. My son loves Murph and does not approve of the change.
Oh.
I wonder if this is now Murph's adult form, or perhaps his species goes through multiple changes like this during their life cycle.
Yeah.
Maybe each season we'll see Murph enter a cocoon and emerge as a new form. Oh, what a great idea.
Oh, I think that would work pretty well.
Yeah. And then he goes on to say, maybe the final form is Wesley Crusher. His current form is moving in that direction, and I can see a little season 1 Wesley in him. My favorite line was Jankum Pog reacting to being told they cannot enter the neutral zone. It's neutral. It's right there in the name.
That was very popular in our listening.
I have thought that my entire life. Why are the Romulans able to enter freely and bully Starfleet to leave? Shouldn't it be mutual? Final thought. I think I picked up some Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan ship noises on the Dauntless towards the end, which was cool. Thanks again for your podcast. I hope you both enjoy the upcoming holidays.
Thank you, Andy. That was some great feedback.
And obviously, Andy and I have some things in common. Maybe it's because we're both from the Midwest.
Oh.
Because we had similar thoughts about Murph. We had similar thoughts about the neutral zone. We had similar thoughts about the cliffhanger.
Oh.
We are aligned.
Well, we have another feedback from Cal E, who writes, with the appearance of the Zindi, I'm fully expecting James to make a comment about Enterprise.
I think Cal E is starting to understand you. He's your guy that you're aligned with while I'm aligned with Andy. let's go to our audio feedback from Jeff X-Force 11.
Hello, Star Trek fans. It's Jeff X-Force 11 leaving my feedback about Prodigy Crossroads. Well, in this episode, it really surprised me that we got our Protostar crew crossing over and meeting our Starfleet crew this quickly. And I knew things were going to go bad, but I just did not know how they were going to go. There's misunderstandings on both sides, and it is so bad because all our crew wants to do is tell the truth, but yet they can't because of the misunderstandings and because of the threat of the weapon on board. But this episode was too short. I was so ready to continue the action, but I guess that's what we get for half-hour episodes. All right, those are my thoughts. X-Force is out.
That's true. There's only so much you can do in short episodes.
Though there have been many times when we're watching full-length Discovery episodes where it gets to the end and we're like, oh!
What do you mean it's over?
I do agree. This episode seemed really short. Even though a lot happens, there's a lot of action. Maybe it's because you get really wound up and really into it, and you're still really at the most exciting part when they go, next week.
Yeah, that's true.
That wraps up our feedback for this episode. Then we did get a little more feedback about the previous episode, episode 13, All the World's a Stage. This is also from Andy in the Midwest, and he sent a couple of additional points. I once read that the writers of DS9 had a similar idea when they were discussing ways to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Star Trek. They ended up doing the Tribbles episode, but their other idea was to return to the planet from a piece of the action and find that the residents had abandoned the Chicago mobster theme and were now acting like the crew of the original Enterprise.
Oh, that would have been funny.
It would have felt like the DS9 crew had beamed down into a Star Trek convention. I think they decided it was a little too meta, or perhaps they just liked the Tribbles idea better. Either way, I think the concept worked much better with the tone of Prodigy than it would have in live action. I'm also a little more forgiving of animation, so I enjoyed some of the less believable aspects of the episode that I might have criticized more strongly in live action. And the second point is I too went back and watched Obsession to get some background on Garavik. I had not seen this episode in probably 20 years, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I remember. I was very surprised to see crewman Leslie die on screen because he appeared very regularly throughout TOS. I checked IMDb, and not only does he continue to appear after this episode, but he's actually in the very next episode, as well as every episode throughout the remainder of Season 2. His portrayer, Eddie Paskey, is actually credited with more episodes than George Takei and Walter Koenig. McCoy even declared on screen that he had died, lest we think he made a recovery off screen. My theory is that Leslie was actually identical twins, or maybe triplets, who all served aboard the Enterprise. This would explain why we see him working in various departments as well as appearing in red, gold, and blue throughout the series. Or since this episode takes place after Mud, perhaps Mud gave them a bunch of Leslie androids before they left.
Oh, could have gone with a load of clones.
I think he makes a very good point about how that would have worked as a live action episode. Because the silliness of it wasn't obtrusive.
Yeah.
And you didn't even really think that it was ridiculous as you were watching it. It was just a cute episode. Whereas if they had tried to do that as part of live action, you would have been, oh, I don't know. This is like, it's too much. It's over the top.
Yeah. It did kind of look like a Star Trek convention.
It absolutely did. There's people were all in cosplay. Yeah.
Wasn't enough Klingons, though.
That's true. Normally here we would do the Star Trekkiness, but we're actually going to insert a new section here, and we're going to do the Star Warsiness, and then we'll do the Trekkiness. What Star Wars things did you see in this episode?
Well, I'm going to go with the Planet of Hoth, the Mos Eisley Hive of Scum and Villainy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Land speeders, and as you pointed out, the sound effects seem somewhat similar.
The sound effects were similar. There's the scene where they're escaping as the doors are closing, and that reminded me of The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, yeah.
And when the speeder sort of spins out and stops, I mean, that was very Star Warsy.
It felt a little solo speeder chase.
Yeah.
I guess you could draw a lot of parallels with other things and say, oh, that seems a little Star Warsy.
Well, you could. Star Wars doesn't have a monopoly on ice planets, but there were just maybe a few other things that happened when you put them all together that you're like, wow, this feels a little Star Warsy.
The roguish captain with a crappy-looking spaceship.
That's very true.
I think that might be a trope through a lot of fiction.
Yeah, But he also had an eye patch like Martog in Deep Space Nine.
Ah, yeah.
So maybe we should move to the Star Trekkiness.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the Star Trekkiness. What did you see as the Star Trekkiness, Kim?
Well, obviously bringing back a TNG character was very Trekky.
Oh, yes. Yes, that was a nice touch. And also I found the reference to he appeared as a DJ in Lower Decks.
Yeah. Also bringing back that quantum slipstream.
Yep.
That was something I've been waiting for, and that's pretty Trekky.
That was from Voyager, wasn't it?
Yes, that was from Voyager. We rolled out Sirius Janeway in this episode.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Sirius Janeway. You didn't want to mess with Sirius Janeway.
That was very Trekky.
Also, the Romulans and the Neutral Zone.
Yeah, and the whole threat of war. Because every time in Star Trek they talk about the Neutral Zone, they talk about going to war with the Romulans.
Yeah.
But somehow the Romulans are always just right there. I mean, again, space is big. How did they have? Did they have Romulans just waiting everywhere?
Yes. How many ships do the Romulans have?
And it wasn't one; it was like 3 of them.
Yeah.
They must have nothing else to do.
Maybe that's the reason why they're all crabby. They're just completely bored.
Oh, how boring! Yeah.
Oh, Romulan ennui.
Romulan ennui. Exactly.
And then the final thing from me is the Xindi, which made their first appearance on Enterprise.
You know what's not very Trekky is we have a couple of examples in this episode of 2 not very good Starfleet officers. Because we've got Barnis Frex and his, I don't know, sort of half-assing his way through everything.
Yeah.
And then we've also got the obnoxious Dr. Noam, who is just not very Starfleety. I get it that we frequently have sort of prickly doctors, but maybe the most prickly of the doctors was a hologram, so I'm not sure that he counts. But this guy he's just a jerk.
Looking at Star Trek history, I guess Bones could be a little crabby at times.
Yes.
But I don't think he was ever outright rude like that.
Except to Spock, but
Oh, true.
otherwise,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
And he still was capable of doing his job. His prickliness didn't interfere with his ability to complete his job.
Yeah.
And certainly Barnis Frex is just useless, but I guess that's why they dumped him out into the boonies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Dr. Noam is, if only they knew that it's his obnoxiousness that caused this.
Right. That could endanger
Yeah.
the whole of Starfleet just because of one obnoxious doctor.
That's right, exactly.
What caused the collapse of the Federation? This doctor who was a complete jerk.
The obnoxious Dr. Noam.
Yeah.
Played by George Costanza. All right, let's move on to rating. What do you give Crossroads out of 10?
It's a 10. I loved it. This is such a great episode. So much action, so much fun, beautiful animation, great use of music. We got to see real Janeway in action, as it were. Thoroughly enjoyable. Huge rewatchability. I hope they can stick the landing on this. Given what they've done so far, I would have no doubt that part 2 will be equally as good.
I agree. It's very rewatchable. And in fact, I watched it 2 or 3 times, no problem. And I would happily watch it again.
Yeah.
I also thought it was very smooth. And it felt, even though it was animated, it felt very live action. And the whole scene in the depot where they are, they spread out to go and try to find someone, and then they individually run into different members of the Starfleet crew. I thought all of that was really well done.
Oh, the pacing was fantastic.
The pacing was fantastic. I do agree. The only thing stopping me from giving it a 10 is that it just abruptly ended, and I am not the world's biggest fan of a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I might come back after next week and revise, but I think I will still give it a 9.
Yeah.
I think it was a great episode.
Agreed.
Very entertaining. Loved the music. Loved all the stuff that happened to the characters. Loved the scene with Dal and Janeway. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah.
I reserve judgment on Murph, but otherwise, really excellent episode. Liked it a lot.
No disagreement there.
All right, well, that wraps up Season 1, Episode 14. Come back next week for Episode 15, I believe airing on Thanksgiving here in the U.S. But before we wrap up the podcast, I want to let you know that James and I can always be reached on RebingeIt@gmail.com and also on Twitter and Instagram @RebingeIt.
And don't forget, you can listen to our Deep Space Nine podcast called ReBinge Deep Space Nine, available everywhere you get your podcasts, and on YouTube @RebingeIt.
To contact us for Prodigy or even be a part of the show if you'd like, you can join the Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Star Trek TTM podcasts. You can also leave audio and written feedback at talkthroughmedia.com/feedback, or you can simply email us at rebingeit@gmail.com. That's how most people get in touch. But there are lots of ways to get in touch and be a part of this podcast.
That's it for this week. Come back next week to hear the ReBingeIt crew take on a new episode of Star Trek Prodigy.
And that's it for me.
And that's it from me.
Oh, and listen to Janeway.
And don't be a Borg.